Hey everybody, my name is Marco. I love talking about video game music from an emotional perspective, and I also like ranking things arbitrarily. So today we're going to be ranking all Soulsborne main themes, going through every single iteration: Demon Souls, Demon Souls Remake, Dark Souls, Dark Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring, rounding us out. Starting off with Demon Souls, the OG. Oh, the drums are really strong. Such... Hold on now, that's plagiarism. That's Final Fantasy VII. Hold on now. It is! It's got the drums and everything. It's really close. I mean, it's fine. I'm mostly being silly, but it's actually very evocative with this, especially because we have the drums and then we have the single soprano voice going da da. Realistically, you can't. That's not really plagiarism, because after all, you can pick any notes on a piano. There's 88 keys, and you just happen to land. I mean, listen. Da, 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 da. It's pretty interesting though that both Demon Souls and those chosen by the planet, which is Sephiroth's true theme in Final Fantasy VII, share that common denominator of being A natural to B flat, A natural to A flat, or G sharp if you want to be pedantic, and then going up. And it's very interesting because I think that's a very, very, very evocative sound, in particular, that particular range. Because check this out. What happens if we go lower? That half-step movement is kind of visceral. Instead of going A, B, C sharp, which would be the standard movement of that scale in the Demon Souls main theme and those who are chosen by the planet, we actually end up going A, B flat, A, the root. It's uncomfortable. It's an unnerving sound. Those half-step movements cause discomfort, which is why it's so effective. Instantly, when you start with this particular Demon Souls OG main theme, you're creating a sense of discomfort, plus playing it out in the lower register with that sort of hit with the percussion. It just hits in a way that makes you feel unwell, and that's what's so powerful about it. And then chaos. Chaos with the percussion. It's an incredibly simple motif, and I want to spend time on it because I find it really interesting. So first of all, we start off nice and quiet, then we pick up, and also this wouldn't be like a really fair ranking if I didn't go hyper into detail about every aspect of every song until I burn out about 2 songs in. But all that to say that is extremely effective because range-wise, it's pretty small. That's 4 notes with some repeats. Isn't that wild? That's 4 notes. That's crazy. And that is so effective at delivering a sense of stress. Kind of all over the place, feels really off kilter. Now that same motif is playing in the trumpets. More dissonance. Ooh. Kind of epic. speeding up, kind of unruly. Ooh, stacking chords. Yeah, I mean, compositionally, that sounds fine. You know, it's nothing crazy. I would put that at a C for me. It's not that it doesn't do anything. It's certainly interesting, but it doesn't really do anything. It just repeats itself over and over and over, and it doesn't really have the pomp and aplomb that we get later on, certainly with Elden Ring. It's not a bad theme, but it just kind of just repeats the same literally the 4 notes in different areas, which is interesting. I mean, that's kind of its own variation on a theme. It moves around. Obviously, the motivic idea goes in different directions with different instruments, so I don't want to take a fat poopy all over it, but I don't think that it really does much. Obviously, we've got the original, but what happens when we do the remake? I mean, I like this much better. There's some really nice layering there with the church bells, and now we've got some string tension. Way better. I mean, what a jump in quality. I mean, it's actually, you know, I know that there's a lot of discussion about whether, you know, Demon Souls versus remake soundtrack and how some things are terrible in the remakes music and so on and so forth, but it won't be the main theme. I'll tell you that much. That is a massive improvement in actual like dynamics. And the thing that we have to talk about is the idea that dynamics, I had a professor who told me this actually in a non-gamer episode that you can check out, Greg Wanamaker. I can't remember which part it was, but he essentially was talking about the fact that, you know, dynamics are not just in loud or soft, but also in how much is layered on top of things. This particular example is such a perfect way to grasp the concept of it, because here we have the base version, which is fine, but incredibly simple when you think about how it's laid out. If you were to sit it in front of your computer from left to right, it would be pretty like simple. You know, there's not a ton of doubling. There's not a ton of stacking. Whereas in this version, you have things that are moving in unison that are kind of coming together and creating a richer sound texture, which is far more interesting. And the thing is, like, that's kind of stuff that you won't even necessarily notice. It's not really your job to notice it. Your job is to be affected by it and to be moved by it. And that's the composer's job, to make sure that you do, in fact, end up that way. So I find that to be especially interesting. And this has a real hearty, especially with the organ. There's a real emphasis and a real intensity in that sound that really knocks it out of the park for me personally. Much better. And it also deviates from it. This is really different. Seems like the tempo's faster as well. But do you hear how like vast that sounds? That sounds like the ocean. It's enormous. There's a quality in that of real like size, like just a fuller ensemble, a bigger ensemble, more individual movement, even though it's unison between the strings, the organ, the chorus. There's more accentuated singers and choral members. It's a terrific glow up. Incredible tempo there. Whew. Real tension in that. Yeah, I mean, I mean, the audio quality suffered a little bit in that particular recording I'm listening to. I'm listening to this fantastic compilation done by a person named Tomito that I'll link in the description. But I definitely think that's a solid A, a very, very, very valiant reimagining of a sort of mid song. Actually, I hate myself for saying it was mid because the original is plenty good. It just didn't bring some of the zhuzh that we get in the remake. Let's check out the Dark Souls 1 main theme. You know, I just had a thought. I was sitting here listening to this, and I'm just thinking about the sort of cacophony that is Dark Souls, or the Demon Souls sound. And admittedly, Dark Souls does this thing incredibly well in that it leaves us with a feeling of space. And I think it's cool because the arpeggiation of the harp in there is actually incredibly relaxing. Dark Souls was really the thing that set this whole thing in motion, I think, in a lot of ways, because Demon Souls was good, but I don't think it blew up nearly as much as it did when Dark Souls kind of shifted and changed the way that things are done. When FromSoft really started doubling down on this kind of style of game, you know, having my own experiences with it, it's a pretty introspective experience on like the personal struggle to get good and to really overcome the challenges at hand and be a part of a world that is, you know, not welcoming and uninviting and harsh. And so it's interesting to have the main theme be a sort of meditative, almost transcendent piece where you're essentially basking in, well, there's a picture I'm looking at where you're basking in the glow of a fire. And I think and you're kind of weary and resting. And interestingly enough, I can't remember where this main theme's going to go musically, but I think I find that that's kind of an odd juxtaposition to the content of the actual game. The catharsis of being in a place of peace and hearing this is, I think, fascinating. Because why have that be the main theme? Like, what, you know, wouldn't you want the main theme to be bombastic and powerful? But instead we get something that's deeply introspective and has humanity. Honestly, like, there's so much gorgeous emphasis. The emphasis on those beats there almost brings me a little bit to tears. It's a very, I think because of the constant rotation of this, it almost feels like the wheels of time continue to spin. You know, you're nonstop. You're always on the move. You're always on the go. I actually find myself feeling very somber, like I almost want to cry. That's very odd. I don't know why that's happening right now. I've heard it a million times, but it's like, damn, I don't know why it's fucking me up. This is the kind of stuff that we need to be talking about more. Why music makes us feel emotional, why we get choked up, and knowing why. Maybe not right away, but knowing why is such a power. There's such a power in knowing why something moves you. God, that is like deeply sentimental. I did not anticipate that. Having played through Souls, Dark Souls 1 last year and having, dabbled with it and finally finishing it and doing basically everything I would have wanted to do in it, I find myself at kind of a loss at how deeply introspective that is. Like, that's sad. Shit. Especially this? To the drone? Oh, man. The choir over top? Wow, the way that it muddles. Do you hear that? Oh my God, that shift into how it switches into that feeling of oppression from the danger. The danger lurks behind you, and so you're sitting there breathing in this fire, taking in, and then all of a sudden it feels like this thing, just this hand comes up behind you and grabs you, but then it releases suddenly, and you're like, what? And you're still there. Wow. And I mean, that's profound. That's profound, you guys. That's a profound feeling right there. That loud stringed pulsation, essentially. This like sort of like thing is coming alive. The bubbling up of life, or like the almost the impetus to get up and move through adversity or something. The constant of the harp is really interesting, and how it fills itself around. Wow. I'm actually, I can't believe I've never sat down and listened to the whole thing. That's like so powerful. Just string tremolo crescendo. The thing is, like, that's like such a simple musical gesture. It's not even crazy. It's just strumming and then increased pulsation and increasing in tempo and bowing a little bit harder and increasing in volume. That's it. That's nothing. That's a nothing. And yet somehow it's eviscerate. I mean, it's very powerful. I think too, there's a lifted nature to it. You can feel the breath in it, can't you? It's almost like breathing in danger or release, a gasp of air, a release. Yeah. I mean, there's reason to say why it does a great job of making it sound like a beautiful broken world, a shadow of what once was, a desolate, empty place that used to harbor such love and care and joy and mirth and brilliance, and then it's been left to decay, broken, like that arpeggiation of the harp. An easy S for me, shockingly meditative, shockingly powerful, and very still, with moments of life that are either positive or negative, and I think it feels very true to life in its own sense. It's very honest. It's a very honest piece. Definitely an S there for me. Dark Souls 2, I don't remember this one either. Very different vibe. I mean, repeating pattern again, not dissimilar to the harp, but the piano really shifts the way that it sounds. It feels much more dangerous. And Lost. It's interesting how an under the surface kind of anger and danger exists when this piano, because of the percussiveness of the instrument causes a sense of a lack of there's a lack of softness, and I think part of it is because of the way that we're hitting the hammers of the piano. The keys themselves are, the piano is a percussion instrument. There's a there's a connecting that occurs musically there, and with our fingers hitting the keys, that is agitating. And here too, that undulating sort of spinning cycle feels very desperate, as opposed to the previous theme, because it was with the harp, that felt very meditative and tranquil. The harp is a very heavenly sound. It's a very holy, religious, and I think we attribute the harp with religious pieces of music anyway. The piano feels much more uneasy, and there's a discontentment, a disquiet in this, especially when you start with that slightly dissonant choir as well. It really feels like there is agitation in that sound and agitation in the air. Yeah, that chord on the piano. There too. You know what it feels like? It feels like time. It feels like time is running out in this particular theme. It feels like we're staring down the clock as the clock continues to strike down, our lives seemingly fleeting out of existence. And there's a forward momentum in that doesn't want to move, but cannot, doesn't have an option. It continues to push itself forward. It leaves us feeling empty, and there's an emptiness in this particular sound. But that emptiness is not peaceful. A peaceful emptiness, that you would experience through meditation or something. But instead, it's the opposite. It's an emptiness of angst. It's an emptiness that is accompanied by fear, of terror, of not having done X, Y, Z, or the other. Dissonance there as well. The way that the choir is playing, it's playing there as coupled with the piano, especially in the upper register, which would usually be like childlike or heavenly or very light, ends up feeling really hopeless. There's a hopelessness in the sound that's really pervasive, and it's almost overbearing and overloading. How it really feels disparate compared to the first theme. It really is like it's like feeling ash slip through your fingers. It's bleak. Some major dissonance, some major sharps, actually sharp notes there in the voice. Very, very empty again. There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to turn. It's a rainy day that's constantly raining. You're getting soaked and you can't escape it. It's at every corner. You're stuck in this cycle of torrential rain, rain that washes over you and never lets you ever feel truly free. There's an immense sadness in that piece, and it's a deep sadness. It's a sadness where life never seems to be getting better, even though maybe around the corner the sun will be shining very soon. But it feels so bad to be in that position that it's impossible to escape. As far as a musical piece, I think it's fine. I think it's probably it's a B for me. It's not terrible. It's not bad. It's not good. It doesn't necessarily make me feel XYZ, and it's certainly not a piece that I would enjoy listening to on a casual listening experience. Certainly not compared to Dark Souls, but definitely not compared either to the Demon's Souls remaster, which felt more pronounced and more evocative of more strong emotions. I think there is a place for Dark Souls 2's main theme, and it's quite powerful, but it doesn't land in the same way as Dark Souls 1. Now, of course, Dark Souls 3 I'm quite acquainted with, but for the sake of measure, we have to listen to it, and I'll have some thoughts as we go. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to really compare them because this is absolutely the most superior of the three. As much as I adore the discovery of Dark Souls' main theme, Dark Souls 3's main theme really drives home the idea of a feeling of rebirth, absolutely, of the Phoenix Rising, the feeling of stepping into ownership over oneself and saying, no, not today. I'm seeking what I'm seeking, and I will achieve that goal. There's a real sense of, despite that still having that brokenness in that sound, the soprano soloist, absolutely, which I think is Yuka Kitamura, the ascension into the heavens feels very like stepping onto the throne. The themes of these main themes definitely harken back to the actual themes of those games, of course. It's just a very powerful and driven piece, even though it's not necessarily fast, driven in the sense that it makes you feel like you are stepping into yourself and facing conflict head on, even just in the bells and in the way that the movement of the melody line there as well. It's very, very, very awakened and awoken and determined and focused and will stop at nothing. Now, you know, that said, I would also say that the lamenting violin, there is a bit of discontentment in that. There is a bit of a sound of languishing, but it almost feels like there's an obligation, a forced commitment to seeing something through. I definitely feel like the rhythm drives that forward in a sense, and that's why I feel that it's more about taking action, but there is some plaintiveness in that explains that it maybe is an action that is not wanted. It feels broken and bleak, but it also feels very determined and focused at the same time. It's an interesting theme, I think, because how much it moves compared to the other two, and if Dark Souls 2 is very broken and very bleak, and Dark Souls 1 was very meditative with a little bit of maybe even hope or possibility, Dark Souls 3 is it feels like a forced requiem. And I don't really know what any of this stuff means. I'm just sort of pulling it out of my bung, but there is something to be said for any opinion, really, whether it's mine or anybody else's, about how a piece makes them feel. And in my particular case, it does feel like it's driven to action without that is unavoidable. There's no turning around. The men that come up in the second section of the chorus there are so virile. There's an energy in that piece of domination, of control. It's very effective. It's definitely one of the best, if not the best, FromSoft Soulsborne OSTs. For me, that's an S. Absolutely. It's definitely my most favorite to listen to at any rate. But I can't remember the Bloodborne main theme, and I do prefer Bloodborne over all of the other, with Dark Souls 3 being a close second. I'm actually deeply in love with Dark Souls 3. I did play Dark Souls 3 the most, I think. I think I played Dark Souls 3 to New Game Plus 6? I'd have to check my PlayStation, but Bloodborne is the one that holds my heart. That was the first of the Dark Souls from Soulsborne games that I actually finished. Let's check out Bloodborne's main theme. Now, historically, I actually think that Bloodborne is the best of the FromSoft soundtracks. Let's see how it fares neck to neck with all these others. I think what's incredible, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is the best theme already. I already know. I'm not biased, so I won't accept that as a possibility. The reason why I say that is the sheer pressure that we hear right away is phenomenal. And you would say to yourself, like, Marco, well, nothing happened. But that's just it. It's the tension. It's the tremolo in the strings, the long bowing in the strings, the setup for that that is profoundly impactful. And also the cleanliness of the Bloodborne soundtrack is insane. It is a incredibly well produced album. It deviates from the tried and true. Frankly, I'd really like to see FromSoft make a Dark Souls game, or like a Soulsborne, but make it like in a sci-fi world. I was thinking about what kind of era I'd like to see, but it seems like we're going to be stuck in sort of a medieval, high fantasy style. I appreciate how much this veered off of the beaten path. Besides Sekiro, they really haven't deviated beyond the sort of high medieval, high fantasy sort of aesthetic, besides, of course, Armored Core, but I mean purely in a Soulsborne style. You can hear, it's amazing. I know we're going to peek here in a second, but you can actually hear the bloodlust in those strings. And the this feels like we're losing a battle. A real, like, a transformation that occurs, which makes sense, but the strings here, it's a very, very visceral sort of string movement, and I just love that consistently held violin and string section there, where really it buoys the whole experience, and there's a sense of absolute bleakness, and a sense of total, like, just solitude, loneliness, almost an exasperation kind of. It's just so effective. dissonance there. And see, there's a sustaining there as well. We have some moments that come together, but generally it's really just like, it's just stretched out to hell, and it really, really leaves you almost gasping for air, kind of, which is fascinating because it's not a piece that's inherently movement heavy, and yet it does such a great job of giving you the sense of just space and the sense of drowning in the sound, kind of like really feeling like you're trying to catch your breath. You know, it's palpable. And that's loss. That movement down like that, that's this world just crumbling upon itself. Just everything falling apart. Everything just being completely enveloped in this disgust and this nastiness and all the aspects of Bloodborne. This bleak gray hue, the black hues of death. It's incredible. Ooh, nice dissonance. Bah, bah. And interestingly enough, now I think it's easier for us, those of us that actually know the plot of Bloodborne, know the direction that it goes in, but you can actually hear some of the cosmic destruction that occurs in this little section, especially when we go dissonant there and we dip into the sharps and flats. That's where we actually get the pressing of that sort of otherworldly ethereal quality. Let me just rewind for 10 seconds so you hear what I mean. Oh. Right there. Piada, pion. Now, I think it's incredibly well composed. It's a terrifying, uncomfortable, disarming, and stressful piece to listen to. I do think that actually the Dark Souls 3 main theme is better. I do think that, even though I do think I prefer everything about Bloodborne over Dark Souls 3 if I'm comparing the two directly, I think Dark Souls 3's main theme is a more cohesive journey. I think it's a much more interesting journey to, well, it's not a more interesting journey to listen to, but it's a more comfortable one because it follows certain tropes. I think Bloodborne's main theme here really actually it gives into that the Victorian Lovecraftian horror element, that it makes it more unpleasant, and it does so incredibly well, which is why it's probably, for me, it's not an S, just for the single fact that it isn't something I want to put on. So for me, in this particular ranking, I'm going to give that a very, very, very solid A+. And I do think that it's on equal footing as the Demon's Souls remastered, the remake OST as well. Both offer something interesting and different. Let's head over to Sekiro, a game that fills me with violence and rage and anger. You know, interestingly enough, you actually feel the sense of responsibility in that track. I find that track extremely interesting. Now, granted, I've played enough of Sekiro to know the themes, so I do think that helps that statement, but I do feel there's a heft in the sound. It almost like it's being weighed down. You You know, like that's the thing that really that comes through. There's a weight, there's a pressure, there's a, you know, a determined focus in there that's really interesting. It's powerful because this is the only one of these themes, these main themes, that really feels determined, and it has a forward momentum into taking action. Because of the way the tempo is, because of the way the piece moves itself, there's an absolute sense of responsibility, of action, of taking action, of moving forward that we don't necessarily see in the other themes. The other themes are a little bit sleepy by comparison. Bloodborne's is very mood setting. Dark Souls 3 is obviously, there's a tragic action in that piece. Dark Souls 2 is bleak, broken. Dark Souls 1 is very emotional, very meditative, very trance-like, very like taking a moment's pause to reflect on the situation at hand. There's a gravity within it. In Demon Souls Remake, that's where we hear absolute like terror and an element of danger. And in Demon Souls, the first one, that's in a way, even though it's parsed down, you do still get that sense of like, this is a messed up world. So in terms of Sekiro, I wish that it had more. It's very short, and it doesn't seem like the priority was making a main theme that really sent us into action. So, you know, for me, I think Sekiro's is also a C. Well, is it? Okay. If Sekiro's is a C, then Demon Souls original is a D. And I think it's not to say that I don't think it's very good, because I actually do, and I like the forward momentum comparatively to the other tracks, but it doesn't quite hit the same arc that I would have liked. It feels a bit short, which I think it does it a disservice. And in reality, there's probably a lot of stuff about Sekiro that I don't actually know that I should pay attention to and listen to, because I do know that that there are some very high musical highs. And then of course we have the big bad Elden Ring. That's right. Yeah, that's interesting to me, because I just realized that I reminded myself that Demon Souls and Elden Ring have the same rhythm, but just one of them is sped up and has way more texture to it, which is, of course, this Elden Ring soundtrack. I mean, the Elden Ring main theme. The Elden Ring main theme is fascinating to me because it is grandiose. It is massive. It is the weight of responsibility. It is the power struggle. It is the conflicts. It is like this seismically Wagnerian piece that really places you in a situation. It feels like a war-torn area. It feels like a battle. It feels like being pulled into 8 different directions. It feels like you are in the middle of this whole thing, and you're kind of, how do I put the pieces together? Like, where do I go from here? Because there's this whole conflict that you're not even a part of. That's really the Elden Ring main theme sound to me, is that there's a weaponization of the music there, especially with the heavy percussion, that sends home the idea that you are minuscule in the face of all the grand and complicated problems that the Lands Between has faced and come to face, that you're insignificant. You do hear that column of sound, that virility in that sound, especially with that lower brass, the trombones and the tubas, I would assume mostly trombones, of just driving home that feeling of you're nothing. You know, there's nothing there's nothing that you can do. And I especially think ending there with that strong male chorus is really like that. It's really like two arms. Let's gather around and you know, we strike at dawn kind of vibe. It's very much a war piece. And interestingly enough, I've never listened to these main themes back to back to back. Even though the Elden Ring main theme is one of my favorites, I find myself going back to Dark Souls 1's main theme as probably my favorite of the lot. I think that Dark Souls main theme is the most thoughtful, the most up to you to imagine, the most up for interpretation, the most transcendent of the context, in some ways the most visceral. That's the first word that came to my mind, even though the Elden Ring soundtrack is probably the most visceral of all of these main themes. But Elden Ring's soundtrack hits you right in the face with it. Whereas there's a little bit of nuance that gets left on the table that the Dark Souls 1 main theme really provides you with. I think it's a fantastic entry point into the Lands Between. It certainly sets up the conflict in one of the best senses. I think between that and Bloodborne, they're both kind of at a fight with each other there. Looking at the final rankings here, I think I would probably put Elden Ring at an A with Bloodborne. I would put Dark Souls 3 and Dark Souls 1 at an S. I would put Dark Souls 2 at a C. I would put Demon Souls Original at a D, and I would put Demon Souls Remake at an A. Oops, I forgot about Sekiro. Let's put it at F for forgettable. No, I'm just kidding. It's a C. That would be the final rundown of this, ranking them from best to worst. And I think it was a really interesting experience to step back into these pieces and really think about what makes them so interesting, both in terms of context, having understood a bit of the context, having my own playthroughs, and also out of context and how these pieces are composed, produced, and created. I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly did. Thanks a ton, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.